Umelá inteligencia, Tesla, robotika, Tesla, solárne Tesla, batérie, Tesla, senzory, Tesla, 3D vizuál, Tesla, veľké Tesla, výpočto Tesla. Celý priemysel zjedli krivky tvaru S. Rovnako chybne krivka v tvare S. Nový trh, prevrat trhu. Staršiu prezentáciu typka menom Seba som zhrnul v jednom z prvých videí v klasickom štýle. Nevidia pred sebou ľadovec. Nevidia svoj kolaps. Inými slovami, sú v piči. Pred 10 rokmi napísal knihu, ktorá bola štúdiou veľkých technologických zmien minulosti a trendov budúcnosti. Predpovedal v nej vývoj cien batériek, elektromobilov, solárnych panelov a pár ďalších vecí. A nemýlil sa. No svet sa mu v tú dobu vysmiel. Samozrejme, že vďaka investíciám do týchto technológií je už dávno za vodou. Ak chceš vedieť jeho predpovede budúcnosti, v tomto videu ho nechávam rozobrať tieto myšlienky podrobnejšie, bez väčších zásahov.
I want to talk about the next 20 years, but before I do that, I want to take you back a little bit to history. 1900 New York City, we used cars, we humans used horses as our main means of transportation for thousands of years. In a sea of horses, there is one car in this picture. 13 years later, in a sea of cars, there is one horse in that picture. That was the last major disruption in transportation, and it happened really quickly. And in my work in disruption, we have found tons of examples of what we call the X curve. Essentially 10 to 15-year disruptions across sectors, across time. Corn, dye, coal, across the board, insulin, 10 to 15-year disruptions. It's not unusual. And it's usually the experts and the insiders and the mainstream analysts who dismiss disruption. Even former entrepreneurs who disrupted industries don't see the next disruption. So today I want to tell you about the great transformation of humanity. And this is a compendium of several of my books over the last 10 years, 15 years, and some analyses. And essentially the summary is that disruptions are happening in all levels, all around the world, all at once. The next 15, 20 years are going to be the most disruptive in history, bar none. And it's not just disruption. It's what I call phase change disruption. But first, how does disruption even work? Because it's an abused term, right? And I have dedicated the last 15 years or so to study change. How does change happen? When does small change happen, and when does big change happen? And this is the quick slide to understand. We start usually from a place of stability. And this can be at a societal level. It can usually be at an industry sector level, right? So in the case of electric power, for instance, the value chain, the transmission and distribution have more or less worked the same way for the last 100 years. Now, we've had innovations, but the value chain itself, more or less, has been stable. But all along, there are technologies that are improving in cost and capability. And we need to understand what to pay attention to, right? Because usually, yes, there are disruptive technologies, but the big disruptions, the 10x disruptions, what I call phase change disruptions happen when there is a convergence of technologies. Now, when there is a convergence, it opens up the opportunity space. Entrepreneurs see it. Now, think about Tesla and BYD and others. Around 2009, right? That's when the convergence for electric vehicles happened. So a bunch of entrepreneurs rush into this place, and over the following few years, they invest and they improve their products in cost and capability, right? So whether it's solar or electric vehicles and whatnot, over the following few years, they improve until they rupture the system. So the system, the rupture point for electric vehicles happened around about 2020. And essentially after that, we enter into a phase change. The system becomes unstable. So the things that used to hold the system together don't work anymore. The rules, the old rules don't apply. The new rules may not be clear, but the old rules certainly don't apply anymore. So in that phase change, essentially after that instability, because the old rules, the old brakes don't work, that's why the new disruption always happens as S-curves.
Krivky tvaru S. Tvaru S.
And then the new becomes the new system, and we go back and we start over again. So technology cost curves. So in my book, Clean Disruption of 2014, I basically published this exact slide where I said, over the following 15 years, here's the cost curve of lithium-ion batteries. And, you know, at the time, I mean, folks called me insane. $100 per kilowatt hour by 2023? Really? Well, here we are. And it just crossed $100 per kilowatt hour, just on the money. But the point is not to be right on the money to the month. The point is more or less to anticipate the disruption. I mean, it doesn't take a genius, because cost curves are like gravity.
Oh, Jesus!
They're like gravity. It will happen. Now, convergence is what opens up the phase change, the big disruptions, right? So think about 2007. Why did both Apple and Google come up with the iPhone and iOS the same year? I mean, Android and iOS the same year, 2007. Not 2004, not 2010. Why 2007? That's because all the technologies that were essential to making a $600 smartphone converged in 2007. So the disruption was going to happen, right? And the other lesson is the following. Disruptions come from the edge. The incumbents didn't see it coming. Motorola didn't see it, remember them? Nokia didn't see it, remember them? Right? So it was two companies that never built a phone before that came into the space and disrupted the incumbents. S-curve is very important, right? I mean, you sometimes see straight line predictions for technology. That never happens. Not a single time in history has there been a disruption that happens linearly, right? And I've studied disruptions all the way back to, well, the first domestication of plants and animals, which was a major disruption. But going back to the car in America, from about 1910 to 1920, so in the space of 10 years, essentially it went from about 10 to about 80% penetration in just 10 years. And that was more than 100 years ago. And it happened while we built two new industries, right? We built a new road transportation. We fought a war and the meanest influenza pandemic in history. Does that sound familiar, right? So if anything, S-curves are accelerating. Some of these S-curves look like J-curves. It happens so quickly. Why do smart people in smart companies, even former winning disruptive entrepreneurs, don't see the next disruption? Why do they not see the disruption that entrepreneurs do? That's because of the incumbent mindset, right? There's a whole number of attributes within the incumbent mindset, but one of them is the linearity in which they see the world changing, right? That the EV is just a clean combustion engine. It's not. It's something totally different, right? And the one-to-one substitution, the idea that I call the faster horse syndrome, right? The faster horse syndrome essentially is the idea that, 100 years ago, the car was just a faster horse because, that was what we knew. But of course we know that the car was not just a faster horse, right? The car enabled the biggest disruption at all levels, right? Sector in transportation, in energy, at the societal level, right? Everything changed in the 20th century because of the car and electricity, right? And so the key idea of a phase change disruption is that it leads to a new system. It's not just a variant of the old system, it's a dramatically new system with new rules and new metrics and new behaviors that you may not even think about in the past. It's not a one-to-one substitution. So a key idea to think about this is that a butterfly is not a faster caterpillar, right? A butterfly is something else altogether. It's a different life form. So when you think about these phase change disruptions, think about a different life form altogether. And the ripple effects across society of phase change disruptions can be amazing, right? So again, the car changed everything about the 20th century. It changed geopolitics, it changed war, it changed how we built cities. We built cities for the car in the 20th century, not for people, right? So it changed everything. So let me talk about the first phase change disruption of tonight, the disruption of transportation. So again, in that same book, Clean Disruption, I published this other cost curve for electric vehicles with 200-mile, 300-plus kilometer range. And again, at the time, there was only Tesla, the Model S, which was $80,000 or $100,000, right? And the idea, I said that by 2023, by now, there would be $15,000 electric vehicles with 300-kilometer range. No subsidy, right? The market would bring them. And that was considered insane at the time. And I also said that by 2025, it would get down to about 11,500. Inconceivable, right? Again, it sounded insane. And, I went to the Shanghai Auto Show in April.
The Chinese.
The BYD Seagull is $11,400, right? Not bad, eh?
Keď tu dorazia čínske elektromobily pod 20 000, určite si každý bude kupovať spaľováky nad 20 000. Samozrejme.
It doesn't work that way.
Again, cost curves are like gravity. It's there's no opinions about gravity, right? So BYD was even a couple years ahead of what was insane prediction of 10 years ago, right? And my crazy prediction from 2014 was that by 2030 it's over, right? And so why? Because by 2030 there's going to be $5,000. So that car is probably going to cost $5,000. So for purely economic reasons, by 2030, transportation in competitive markets is pretty much over for combustion engines. But that is not the disruption, really. The big phase change disruption is actually the convergence of autonomous, electric, and on-demand transportation. Think Uber, Didi, Robotaxi, right? Owned, managed by fleets. So essentially, you know that there are already autonomous vehicles level 4, pretty much in many countries by now. In China, I saw them, and in San Francisco. This is a ride. They're commercial. 2 companies already are offering commercial rides in San Francisco. We know that AI is improving at crazy, not just exponential, double exponential basis. I mean, Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, says that it's improving at the rate of about 1 million times over the next 10 years, right? So the idea that level 4 is not going to improve and be many, many times better than human drivers is not looking at the evidence, right? And so the day that transport as a service, right, is available, it's going to be on a per kilometer basis, a tenth of the cost of owning a car, any car, a tenth. 10x has always enabled disruptions and quick disruptions, always, every single time in history. So, you know, TaaS is going to be so cheap, it's going to be 4 times cheaper than the operating cost of a combustion engine car. 4 times cheaper than just the operating costs, right? It's going to be so cheap that the cost per kilometer is going to be cheaper than just the cost of gasoline. What do you think is going to happen?
Allahu Akbar!
So I see that by 2030, you know, most miles will be electric in one form or another. Energy is a little bit different. Solar today is the cheapest source of energy on the planet in history. There never has been a source of energy as cheap, period, right? It's so cheap that solar plus a few hours of storage is cheaper than the operating cost of pretty much everything else. The operating cost, right? So it's over, right? And why? You can power pretty much every place on Earth. Alaska can be powered. Germany can be powered. Denmark with a 100% solar, wind, and battery system. And so in Alaska it works, and it's the cheapest possible energy system. In Germany it works, and it's the cheapest possible energy system. And you don't need seasonal storage. You don't need hydrogen. You only need 1, 2, 3, 5 days of battery storage. Well, solar PV went down by 82% in the 2010s, from 2010 to about 2020. I said PV was going to drop by 80 to 90% in the 2010s. And solar PV is going to keep dropping by another 70%. And batteries, which dropped by about 87%, it's going to increase by another 80%, right? So when the cheapest source of energy gets 70% cheaper, what do you think is going to happen? Disruption, right? But, and here's the but, it's not going to be a one-to-one substitution where you swap out coal or gas or whatever and you put in solar and batteries. That's not the way it's going to happen. It's non-linear. So the more generation you have, the less storage you need. You know, it's not intuitive, but we found that. But it's along a U curve, right? So if you design the system for the bottom of the U, then you get massive amounts of power, 2, 3, 4, 5 times more power the rest of the year, which we call superpower. And superpower is an emergent property of the new system, right? So imagine a system that generates 5 times more energy than the existing system most of the year, right? Nothing can compete with that. So a place like Texas can essentially have 100% SWB with two days of storage. And disruptive economics, because it's non-linear, you can add 20% to the system in terms of money, and it returns 200% more energy. Pretty cool, right? For the financial folks in the room, 20% increase in investment, 200% increase in energy return. So, you know, this is not just an energy transition. This is a real phase change disruption of solar, wind, and battery. As you can see, phase change disruptions are happening in every sector, everywhere, all at once. And when that happens, the ripple effects to humanity are going to be huge. In my estimation, we haven't seen transformation of humanity this big since the first domestication of plants and animals 10,000 years ago.
A keď budeš najbližšie neveriacky krútiť hlavou a rozčulovať sa vo výške 10 kilometrov v kovovej tube letiacej 900 kilometrov za hodinu, prečo nevieš získať informácie celého ľudstva rýchlosťou svetla bežným dotykom vankušikov prstov, ktorými narúšaš elektrické polia krabičky svojho vreckového sluhu? Skús sa zamyslieť. Či sú tie veci naozaj tak neuveriteľné?
The potential, like I said, is really boggles the mind, because you have to say, like, what is an economy? An economy is sort of productive entities times their productivity, capita times output, productivity per capita. At the point at which there is not a limitation on capita, it's not clear what an economy even means at that point. An economy becomes quasi-infinite. So, what taken to fruition in the hopefully benign scenario, this means a future of abundance, a future where there is no poverty, where you can have whatever you want in terms of products and services. It really is a fundamental transformation of civilization as we know it.
Z koní do aut, z aut do robotaxíkov, z práce na slobodu, zo Zeme na Mars.